Part of the reason I wanted to talk to you guys today is I continue to be impressed with how successful some of the PR for veganism and vegetarianism is. To my surprise, even people who had great success with omnivorous diets are slowly, encroachingly being persuaded that they really ought to be vegetarians. And if they had the real mettle of a firm will, they'd even go as far as being a vegan. A lot of that persuasion is couched in other issues than just the physiology of humans as opposed to the physiology of other herbivores. So I want to at least address that. Now, I'm going to get a little bit of a historical background. There was a book written by T. Colin Campbell quite a while ago called The China Study. It used to be sort of famous and everybody asked, oh, have you read The China Study? I don't hear that so much anymore. But the legacy of that book and that study still is sort of the foundation of what we think of as veganism. I've read the book. Charlie Davis, my co-author for Quantitative Medicine, read the book. We have our own critiques. We've gone through some of the math. But it's our conclusion, and not just ours, virtually anybody who's done the math has agreed that it doesn't, the conclusions are not supported by the evidence put forward. And I can be clear about that. But to make it kind of fun, Charlie set up on our Quantitative Medicine site. I'm going to share this screen with you because I want you to see it. It's pretty neat. In our quantitativemedicine.net site, if you enter here and do search, say China Study, you'll find a couple of entries on our website about it. This is a very quick review of the book, or at least the outline of what the book concludes, and the evidence that it's based on. What's nice about it is this is public data. So while in his book he summarizes some of the areas primarily that he was focused on, we actually have World Health Organization data for every canton in China. So this is that data. It's raw data, and I'm just kind of throw this out at the front if you want to do some fun things. We've created a way for you to look at it. Now, for example, we all have been told ad nausea that your total cholesterol was going to predict your life expectancy. Well, in the 69 provinces of China, if you look at all-cause mortality between the age of 35 and 69 and plot that, and I'll explain the plot, what this shows is, by the way, decreasing a slope this way means there's decreasing mortality, and a slope that goes that way means increasing mortality. So what you'll see, and this is a scatter plot. These are trend lines. You know, it's a first derivative. That actually shows you that the higher your cholesterol, the longer you live. Now that's just from this pool set all over China, but that's been reproduced. That was in the BMJ, a British Medical Journal. There's a lot of other sources for that if you want to look at it. But I thought this was kind of fun because think of all the things we've been told that are good for us or bad for us, and high cholesterol was the worst. But let's suppose that one of the other things you'll read a lot is eggs are bad for you because why? They're high in cholesterol. Well, so all-cause mortality, we're going to plot it. This is a very nice graph for a scatter graph. The more eggs you eat, the longer you live. That's just what the data shows. I didn't make that data up. It's right there. It's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. You can always look at the methodology, and I encourage you to do that anytime you look at a study. But this is raw data. It's available to anybody. It's just public data. And what you'll find as you fiddle around with this, almost everything you thought doesn't turn out to be true. So let's suppose you have a lot of light colored vegetables in your diet. All-cause mortality, you can pick different ranges and different diseases. You can look for specific diseases. You can look for anything, actually. But that's a good broad range for age. So you eat lots of light-colored vegetables. Notice that goes up. The more light-colored vegetables you eat, the shorter your life expectancy, at least in this data. And this is a lot more extensive than any, I saw 100 people or there were 1,000 people at Loma Linda who are vegetarians because they're Seventh-day Adventist. It's a lot larger data pool than that. Percentage animal food intake. Well, that must kill you, right? Plot it. Oops, slow goes down. So there's a lot of paradox. Well, they're not paradoxes, but a paradox is if you accept the premise that veganism is the best diet or vegetarianism is the best diet. Anyway, I want you to, if you want, go in and play with it and you'll be surprised. I can give you lots of examples of fun numbers in terms of foods that you take in or blood tests that you might want. For example, we know that vitamin C is a great deal is made of that. It doesn't seem to do much. And notice this is dietary vitamin C. It's not a supplement level, but certainly you should be surprised, or at least I am. The more vitamin C you take, it does seem to help, but not very much. That doesn't argue against taking 30 grams or taking none. It just shows here's what vitamin C does across the population. So if you'd like to play with that, please do. Quantitativemedicine.net, enter China study. There's 2 in there. And you can play with these numbers. Just make up your own theory. Why, I'm going to live as a pick anything you want. I'm going to red meat. I'm going to live on red meat. That's another good one. Did I miss it? All right. It must be going to kill me. No, it seems to be. And again, got to be careful with the scatter because that's not going as far down the numbers as you'd think, but still very interesting trend, especially if you think there's something behind veganism or vegetarianism. And this is the data that the very founder of veganism used to draw the conclusions that we all should be vegans. It's bad data. Now, I'm gonna do a little more of a presentation. I'm going to blame all of this on Phil, by the way. Any mistakes in here are entirely of Phil's making, and anything that's of value is, of course, being added by me. The reason why I'm giving Phil a hard time is he's the one that did the actual PowerPoint. He's already kicked me. All right, why this topic and why now? We are all becoming victims of fashion. I truly mean that, victims of fashion. Now, nothing I'm going to tell you should say you should or shouldn't be a vegan, or you should or shouldn't be an omnivore. It doesn't say that. What I'm trying to get you to do is separate out the issues of ethics, aesthetics, environmentalism, separate out those issues from immutable biological facts. And then you can go ahead and make your choice as you choose. But at the bottom line, don't conflate all these issues to decide what the proper diet for you is. Because as far as fundamental physiology, we ain't vegans. Pardon me putting it that way. So once we divorce diet choices from these issues, we can make informed decisions about our health and vigor. The insidious nature of propaganda, and that's a strong word, but it's turned into that. My profession has become very deeply politicized, and I'm sorry to see that happen. It's happened over quite a long period of time, but here are examples. We've been told eggs are bad. And why were eggs bad? Because they're high in cholesterol. Well, even a recent study, which is a meta-study that looked at all the studies that looked at eggs, found an inverse dose relationship. The more eggs you ate, the less heart disease you had. Well, if you believe cholesterol is the whole thing, well, that doesn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense because it turns out cholesterol isn't the driver in the story. There's so much additional nutrition in eggs that whatever their effect on cholesterol, it's overridden by the fact that eggs are good for you with B12 and folate and just a huge array of things. Fiber is good. Now I want to talk about that one because that's another one where we start to look at the physiology of differences. We know, for example, that true carnivores in the wild, they don't have any fiber in their diet, and they have very nice bowel movements. And the herbivores in the wild eat lots of fiber, both soluble. Well, for them, none of it's insoluble, and they have nice bowel movements. Well, of course, we're not lions, and we're not, lots of other herbivores. What you will find, and this is important to understand, within humans as a species, there are huge differences. I have patients who have, I know pardon me for the image, but it illustrates this deep physiology, who have great bowel movements with little or no fiber. I have others that will become constipated if they have a steak. There's that difference within humans that doesn't define whether you're a human or should eat like a gorilla. So be aware there's a huge genetic variation across the species, and this species in particular. There is another story out there that we can get all of our nutrients from vegetables and fruits. That's simply not true. It's at the chemical level, not true. Now, how people get away with this or get around this is they say, well, B12, that's got to be had from animal sources. Well, there is a micro green algae where you can get some B12, but it doesn't take long reflecting on that's not part of our evolutionary history. And that evolutionary history is what we have to be hearkening back to and listening. Our evolutionary history has made us so that we need certain things from meat that we don't get from fruits and vegetables. Well, why don't herbivores, for example, need that in the same way? I'll touch on this later, but let me talk about it now. For example, we look at a gorilla, which is a big, strong, muscular animal, and it's basically an herbivore, although it eats grubs and insects and stuff like that. It's essentially an herbivore. Where does it get its protein? Well, it's a fascinating, disgusting story. They get it from their own intestine. Since they don't digest food the same way humans do, they digest food more like, but not exactly like a horse or even a cow. They've got we could get into the details of a foregut fermentation, hindgut fermentation. We don't have to get into that, but to be clear that where in the heck does that guy get all that protein to be such a big, strong guy? He gets it from the bacteria in his own intestine. He has such a huge fermentation vat. Have you ever noticed their belly? Such a huge fermentation vat that he has lots of protein right there in his own intestine, and he digests it and he grows muscles from it. So even though there's no significant amount of protein in his diet, he's full of protein. He's making protein. He makes protein virtually all day by the bugs that are growing in his own body. So you've got to be a little careful about understanding those issues of variance across species. So we can't get all of our essential nutrients from vegetables and fruits. People then say, well, we can do it by supplements, and we'll talk on that in a little bit. Another thing I'd like to do, since I'm worried that we live under this onslaught of propaganda, is become more of a skeptic. I'll read it with you, I'll look with you, we'll talk about it together. But you find a study that you've got a question about. I got one, somebody sent me the other day, oh, look, less saturated fat, better, less heart disease. Yeah, if you read the study, there was no difference in mortality. What that meant was they were dying of cancer. So it didn't affect their longevity or their life expectancy. They died of one thing rather than another. They died nevertheless. So you've got to be careful about those studies and how it's offered to you. Another story we've been told is supplements are a good idea. Well, yes, if you ignore our essential biology. This is back to our evolutionary legacy. We evolved in a way where we have dependence, deep biological dependence on foods from all sources. Now, that does not mean, and this gets back to the ethics or aesthetics, that you couldn't take supplements and approximate omnivorous diets. But here's the problem, it's only an approximation. When we identify, and medicine is forever doing this, a nutrient or a supplement or a mineral that we need, and ostensibly we're not getting enough of, keep in mind the beautiful complexity of human biology is such, if we've identified one thing, it exists in the context of a matrix or fundamental array of 20 other things that we don't even know or understand. So what we really need is that full complexity which we can only consume, as opposed to taking that one element we've now identified. So once you get that idea that you're taking a supplement because we've discovered one, or a mineral because we now know of its use, that's not the same thing as the diet that created that for you if you were to consume it. So there's not a lot of evidence that supplements are a good thing. There's some are, and I do in fact recommend them sometimes, but only if under specific conditions and if measured and known to be needed. All right, this is probably because I've contaminated his mind. This is three of the points. There are three of the points that Phil wants to make sure you keep in mind when you, in other words, skepticism of studies. Whose idea was it? It's not obvious that any question someone might ask is the right question to ask. They have a motive. Almost every single time they'll have a motive of why they ask the question. How bad are eggs for you? That was the premise of the study that showed that the more eggs you ate, the better. How bad are eggs? Oops, turns out they're good for you. So why did they do that? What's their thought? And again, they don't happen in a vacuum. His suggestion, I think is a good one, is read some studies. Most of them at the clinical level are not so technical that you couldn't sit and make sense of them. And then if you saw a headline on one, go actually read the study. Don't just believe the headline. And you will be stunned at the difference between what they conclude in the media is the meaning of the study, and in point of fact, what the actual study says. So be skeptical about a lot of that stuff. Never forget fundamental biology. So comparative physiology is like comparing apples to lamb chops, which I happen to have for lunch, by the way. The big difference is how they extract nutrition. The herbivores and frugivores and all those ferment food. In other words, they're basically a big alcohol vat, continuously breaking down things that we can't even break down. Cellulose. Cellulose is wood. And I recommend them, most of, for example, the cruciforms, which is cabbage and Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower, all those things are excellent. They're not complete, they're excellent. They're largely cellulose, and the nutrient value of those foods are inside a cellulose storehouse that you cannot digest. It's one of the reasons that those are things I recommend you not eat raw, unless just for flavor, because you're not able to extract the nutrition because they're in this cellulose prison. Well, guess what? All the herbivores have this fermenting process which digests cellulose and releases lots of energy. And that's how they get their nutrition. We couldn't get it that way. So that's one of the reasons, evolutionary historically, that when humans began to incorporate fire in their cooking, that there was an enormous leap, at least according to the evolutionary record, a big leap forward in the size of the brain and the strength and agility of the body. In other words, we got smarter, faster, and stronger when we started cooking foods, and especially when we started cooking meats. That's just a fact. Look it up. What can you do about it? You're stuck with it. You can come up with arguments, aesthetics, ethics, environmentalism, that you don't like that, but that's fundamental and true. So as you are, as we will be, on this onslaught of information that says, no, we all need to be vegetarians. Understand, you may choose to do that. That's not what your body's asking from you. Cows do not get any time off from buffet. You can tell that's a philism, right? What that means is that there is so little energy in the food of the herbivores that they have to eat all the time. All of the time. A gorilla eats 40 pounds of stuff a day. A elephant, hundreds of pounds. They're eating all the time. That's all they have time for. There's so little energy in those kinds of foods that's necessary. And then with their process of breaking down the food, it takes many, many hours for it to get into the system, absorbed into the system. So again, extremely protein-rich diet, their own gut bacteria, which does the fermenting. So this wonderful symbiosis, the bacteria are breaking down the foods, and they're extracting nutrition, and then they give it all up, die for the cause, so that gorilla can be a big, strong guy. This beware of misleading charts. I want to talk about that. If you try to look up comparative anatomy of vegans or frugivores or omnivores or carnivores. This is one of the things that is an example of kind of propaganda. They'll talk about the length of the colon. Oh, you know, a lion's only got a colon 1 to 2 times the length of its body, and these guys have one that's 20 times. And yet they kind of distort even that. And that's where I was really discouraged to see what's misleading out here. So beware of misleading charts. Length matters, but volume matters more. Let me show you this chart. This is one that I was looking for examples of sort of bad science that's out there, and it's designed or intended to convince you that you aren't really an omnivore. You really are a frugivore, an herbivore, okay? Why? Well, your intestines 9 times your body length. Well, that's not true. That's an exaggeration. It's probably more like 5, could be, 4, could be 5. And the intestines of an herbivore is 20 times. That's true, it's very long. And then they're showing the frugivore being about the same as a human. That's just not accurate. So they do a fair amount of kind of fudging of the data. I don't know how malicious the intent is. I think they think they're doing a noble thing, but you got to be careful about this sort of thing. So this is an example of a kind of a florid example of how much misinformation there is out there about the values of herbivores and frugivores and omnivores. And anyway, it's not true. And I can go through it in detail, but the big tell is there are fermenters. Omnivores, carnivores don't. They're not fermenters. They're enzymatic digesters. It's a completely different chemistry. We don't have that. Now, has fermentation ever happened in people? Yeah, we generate gas sometimes. That's in some sense a byproduct of fermentation. It's one of the reasons that cows are known or famous for gas. They develop a lot of it. But it's still, again, be careful if you're going to do the work yourself and unpack the physiology. We're just not like omnivores. Like these other guys. Now, this is an important point. What winds up separating out as supplements is not part of our evolutionary past. You've got to recognize that we are a certain point of evolutionary repletion or completion. And what brought us to this point is this combination of skills, and the metabolism at the deep level is unique in some important ways. Now, B12 is probably the most famous one. People are aware, oh, you can't get that in vegetarian source. As a practical fact, and I've got vegetarians in my practice, you can't. Now, as a supplement, you can, and if you push it, you can actually get it from a relatively rare, highly extracting process, a deep extracting process from spirulina, for example. It's got some, although that's mixed up with an anti-B12, so don't get too carried away there. DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, this is one of the long chain omega-3s. Well, in theory, you can take alpha linoleic acid, ALA, and turn it into DHA. There's a synthesis pathway. But it turns out most people, not everybody, most people can't make an adequate conversion. So they're literally DHA deficient. This is a long chain omega-3. It's part of our inflammation, anti-inflammatory, and immune system. Interesting thing about all these things that are mostly part of meat is every one of these has been associated with intelligence and strength. When those things are found in the species, they're smart and fast. When it's not found, they're slow and less smart, okay? Another one is that I want to kind of hit on besides the B12 and the DHA is heme iron. Now that one's kind of, in other words, that means blood iron. Well, let's name it. Anytime I have a patient starting to be a vegetarian who comes to me as a vegetarian, usually because they're tired, they say, I get plenty of iron. They show me the amount of vegetable-based iron that they're getting. And what they often miss is it's in the context of a lot of anti-nutrients, especially in the legumes. There's some other food problems. There is a class of chemicals. The one is phytic or phytic acids. The others are the lectins, which literally block the uptake of these things. They're anti-nutrients. Their function, and probably some kind of a protective evolutionary function, is to keep animals from getting any food from them so they don't eat them. But the fact is, a lot of the foods that people eat with vegetable-based iron blocks their ability to absorb the iron they've just eaten. So heme iron, blood iron, is the most efficient way to get iron. There's some irony in the fact that the majority of patients I run into who need more iron in their blood so they can generate red cells and not be anemic are averse to heme iron, and they'll go to great lengths, including taking supplemental iron, which results in constipation and other things, just to get their iron that way. It's fine if it's a choice, but understand the body absorbs heme iron dramatically better than it does vegetable-based iron. The vitamin D3 is another example. The D2, calciferol is the D2. That's vegetable derived, and then this is D3, which is meat derived. But in point of fact, we can make our own vitamin D, and I know from testing a lot of people over a lot of time that we just don't. We don't run around naked very often. I certainly don't. And it really takes a high degree of near nudity and midday exposure to generate enough sun-driven vitamin D3. So D3 is a better one at raising your blood D levels than is the D that's derived from plant sources. But these are all things that we get better, or some of which almost exclusively from meat sources. We're not vegetarians, we're not vegans. What do we eat? When do we eat? How much do I eat? Make it simple. Are you getting stronger, faster, sleeping better, and finding life more fun? If the answer is yes, give it a try. Go for it. You want to do that? And I often hear that from former vegans and vegetarians. Oh, I felt so much better. The beautiful thing about the human body is it always feels better if you just change things, but not for very long, if it's not a sustainable diet. I saw a statistic, I got to be careful about these statistics too, that the majority of people who try vegetarianism last less than a month. And of course, that's a big sales point for the vegetarians. Oh, you don't know if it works. You didn't try it long enough. But people don't. And I think there's information there. Something in terms of it. Does it make you feel stronger, faster, sleeping better, and having more fun? Now, this I've mentioned before, and it's a kind of issue for me because it so nicely illustrates the variability across humans besides across species. So again, regular bowel movements are an important marker of health, and so you look at what affects that for you. Reasons to measure: celiac disease, allergies, metabolic deficiencies, problems in terms of some people don't take up iron or heme iron, or some people don't absorb vitamin D except at super high doses. There are a lot of things, and you wouldn't know if you don't measure them. So always be open to measuring, finding out, okay? Things change over time, measure again. Now, this is another reason that nutritional studies are always flawed, and that's a strong word. If you look at the methodology of food studies, there are problems in how the questions are asked, how they chose their sample pool, how open people or honest people are about what their eating behavior is, and in fact, how insightful are they about their own behavior? Most of us don't really know. If you asked me a week ago or a week from now what I eat today, I'm unlikely, well, there was really good lamb chops, I would remember those, but I'm unlikely to be able to regurgitate that, pardon that example. And so there's a lot of problem with these food studies. Just be careful about that. Now, notice this. Now, here I'm trying to impress on you, our evolutionary history is shared across all humans. But even within that, there's such vast differences from some bodies respond best to a carnivorous diet. Some bodies respond best to almost a pescatarian pescatarian diet. There's some variability there, and that's okay, but make sure you're not violating these boundaries of our evolutionary history, okay? But again, 8 billion people, it's a big number. Not sure a study of 5,000 people who live in, again, Loma Linda, just comes up for a lot of reasons, is going to tell you very much. So keep that in mind, be a little careful. A lot of people advocate vegetarianism, and again, because of the Loma Linda example, there's some other ones, but they overlook one important fact. India The majority of Indians are vegetarians at some meaningful level. Not all of them, but a high percentage of them are vegetarians. And yet they have 6 times the incidence of sudden cardiac death as their Indo-European, therefore largely linguistically and genetically similar people in Western Europe. Why do they have that? Well, why do they have so much diabetes and premature heart disease? I can give you some reasons, everything from the caliber of their coronary artery disease, but it's because their attempts at vegetarian diet usually winds up being they live on grains and they have diabetes. But that's an example. And again, Japan, rice and fish, China, there's a whole lot of variability. But if we want a hard example, the continent of India has got to be addressed and understood. I've seen some vegetarians address that as, oh, it's because the Indians have adopted the Western diet, and that isn't true. I mean, I haven't personally established that. I've been told that by Indian natives and from other research. So there's something wrong in terms of the way most people implement diet or vegetarian diet, and it results in a lot of disease. Now, this is again Phil getting in his issues, and they're important ones. What are the exceptions exploiting the using data from one country, no matter how large? A path fraught with potential wrong conclusions, some intentional. So there's a lot of agenda out there. The biggest, if you sit down and, what is it, worldlifeexpectancy.com, I believe. Yeah, worldlifeexpectancy.com. It's a fun site. Not as good as quantitative medicine, but it's a fun site. And it's a mixture of World Health Organization data, CIA data, and all these things in terms of who gets what disease and how long do they live and that sort of thing. And across the board, any exceptions? Oh, no, pretty much. Rich countries do better than poor countries. It's pretty much that simple. And if you want to adopt the diet of a poor country, you can probably live as long as people in poor countries as well, which is an attempt at a protein, meat, poor diet. Here are some examples that Phil brought up about Japan. The French drink a lot of wine, therefore wine must be good for you. Well, it turns out that heart disease is still the primary cause of death, and it's one of the leading, if not the leading cause of not heart disease, liver disease of French men. So is it all good? Is there such a thing as the French paradox? Probably not, because we know that they eat a lot of dairy, a lot of cheese, a lot of other protein as well. So a lot of these things that were sold as proof of some conclusion proved to be on examination not so true. The Japanese do have the longest life expectancy. You can look at these things. There are many more factors that contribute to it. Their healthcare system, good social and familial support. This is the big one in most studies, lower caloric intake. One of my sons is a sinophile, or not a sinophile, he loves Japan. And he tells me it's absolutely illegal to be fat in Japan. And he's making a point that they tend to be lean. And that leanness is not a simple function of their diet. It's also their heavy smokers. We can go through a lot of other causes, but they do have a lower caloric intake. And we do know some caloric restriction, at least intermittently, is not a bad thing. So anyway, be careful how you interpret this information. All right, I'm trying to keep it short today because I usually run long. How am I doing? I'm doing great. I'm doing it nice and short. I would like to open up to some questions. I've got more, but I'll bore you to death with the science, the physiology, the difference. Phil, this isn't unmuting. Alt-M. Yeah. Can I ask, I initially muted everybody, but now everybody's still muted and I'm trying to unmute it. Are you guys muted? Do you have any questions so far? Ask away.
I wasn't able to see any chat on there, but it's where your messages.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I can see the chat, but nobody wrote.
Mike, give us our screens back.
Yeah, please. There you are. Do you have a question, Bill?
No, I just wanted the screens to start with.
There's an option up here. There's an option at the top of your screen. there's two icons. One it says go switch to video, but you can also on here on share screen.
We're up there.
Mike, could you talk about fasting
Yeah, I will.
and any benefits? And
All right, so that's a less fraught discussion than vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, or carnivore. And here's the answer. Just in the same way that there's this incredible variability about humans, there in terms of basic diet type, there's a big variability about the fasting issue. If we looked at evolutionary history, there probably are seasonal fastings that humans went through. In other words, during times of migration or winter or something like that, we would basically go on a long fast. The most common form of fasting that most people talk about now is some sort of intermittent fasting where you eat only 8 hours in a day and you don't eat 16 hours in a day. Now let's take that simple one. And by the way, there's 3 days a week, 3 days once a month. There's all kinds of fasting patterns, but that's the most common one, this intermittent early fasting. And there's a lot of videos, at least on YouTube, that say, oh no, you'll never lose muscle, you'll always be fine. In my patients who are good about following intermittent fasting protocols, it turns out that some of them will lose fat and a lot of fat and a little muscle. And then there's some of them who lose as much muscle as fat. And then there are those who lose as much more muscle than fat. The first person lost a lot of muscle, a lot of fat, a little bit of muscle. It's okay if they gain the muscle back. The person where it's 50-50, they've now created a metabolic hole that they'll have forever getting out of again. Remember, the more muscle you have, the more of a metabolic engine you have, the better you're able to burn and utilize your nutrition. So there's not a single answer. You really do have to measure it. But in principle, is there some reason to try intermittent fasting? It's okay. Most people find it pretty congenial. Starting your eating cycle in the morning as opposed to later in the day is more effective because we're kind of designed for that. We don't, the old phrase I often offered is you eat for what you're going to do, not for what you've done. And therefore, if you do the 8-hour fast or eating cycle, it started earlier is better than starting it later. So there's so many brilliant people giving nice bullet point presentations about fast this way. And I know they're smarter and better than I am, but what I know and they don't seem to know is you got to measure it. If you don't measure it, you might get misled just because there's that much variability in people. Again, in my studies with my patients, some it works great, some it's terrible. It's like the worst thing they could have done just because of the muscle loss. And that's also why scales are so misleading. Oh, I weigh the same. My pants fit better. I've heard that one in people who were clearly less healthy after they went on intermittent fasting. And we actually did their body composition and looked at a lot of their blood markers. Pants fit better. I weigh the same. What could be wrong? Or I weigh less even. But what's the less represents the question. So I'm sorry to give you that kind of, modulated answer. So do you want to try it? Let's try it. Fine. But make sure you measure things. Are you the one who's losing fat and gaining or holding muscle? Or are you the one that's losing muscle and not losing so much fat? We need to know that. But if you're going to pick one, do the morning one. Eat at 6 and stop eating 8 hours later. There's some other patterns. Again, there's a 48-hour fast, a 36-hour fast. There are different fasting patterns, but that's the most common one or popular one right now. Anybody else? Got a question about sugar. For the herbivore, that's all they live on, except for the bacteria they get from their gut flora. But their body can break down cellulose and other long starchy chains that we can't. So humans got to be careful about that. And again, back in the biological spectrum, I have patients who almost couldn't get enough starch in their diet. And I've got others who should never touch starch. And how do you measure it? You look how their body responds to it. How's their insulin? How's their fasting glucose? How are their triglycerides? How's their liver responding? So even there as a sugar issue, you know, pure starch, pure sugars probably aren't good for anyone because they're devoid of other nutrient value. There are people that it will not hurt them at all. That's just basically the truth. Question about marinated or dried tomatoes. Well, I'm not sure what you mean to marinate, because if you're talking about, well, get a tomato any way you can. That's my takeaway on tomatoes. I'm sorry.
Especially from your yard.
Yeah. Anyway, so I love tomatoes. There is some advantage to the dried tomato. There does seem to be some nutritional value to that. I can't quite make sense of that, but there is some evidence that's true. I'd be careful about it, but I don't think it much matters. Question about how about being a vegetarian a couple days a week? I think that's fine. As long as there are a couple days a week, you're darn near a carnivore. In other words, mix it up. That's perfectly fine. You're not going to die one day only having vegetables or only having meat. The tendency, and this is really this cloud that's out there, is, oh, gee, I really ought to be a vegetarian. I know I should. Everybody says it. I mean, there's to me, and I've heard it from others, almost an oppressive sense that they really should be vegetarians. But is it okay to be a vegetarian for a period of time? Of course it is. It's fine. You should try it. Have it for a day. And that's not a vegetarian. But never lose the fact that probably a lot of the things that make you smart and feel good are meat derived. Now that's just the hard facts. Now, can you supplement those things that are missing from meat? Since you're not getting, yeah, you can. But again, you're picking a seed out of the tomato instead of eating the tomato when you take a supplement, if I can use that image. Okay.
It's funny.
Dr. Mike, I have a question.
Sure.
What about this concept of eat for your blood type? I have a friend who says, my blood type says I must eat a lot of meat.
Yeah. Well, the guy who first started that, Tadamo is his name, wrote a book called Eat Right for Your Type. And I think he did some pretty interesting research, to be honest. And he did his own, what agglutinates and what doesn't agglutinate. It's a chemical, it's a sort of an electrochemical reaction between certain particles. And he thought that that would tell him, because of food types, what foods would agglutinate and which wouldn't, which foods you should eat. I think he was onto something. There's enough variability there. I think, well, I know that the genetics of those diet variables don't tightly linked with blood type. In other words, there's some genetics to blood type, there's some genetics to different foods that work well. Now, a lot of that is also based on the notion that a type O is a more primitive blood type as opposed to an A or an AB or a B. That's true evolutionarily. And the type O, therefore, and it's just not, so there's two arguments there. One, his agglutination studies, and two is whatever emerged evolutionarily. And the type O is going to be the caveman, and the AB is going to be the more lithe and thin and so on and so forth, and they don't need as much meat. So there's something to type. It probably doesn't map with blood type. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Sure. Questions about lectins and lectin-containing foods. Well, okay, so lectins are a broad category of proteochemicals that serve mostly, not exclusively, as what we call anti-nutrients. They happen to actually directly bind some other nutrient elements in a way that they're not metabolically available. The most practical excess lectins we get are from legumes. And they actually will alter whether you can absorb iron. They'll alter whether you can absorb a whole array of minerals. They'll alter how your body metabolizes starches, for example. So lectins in that sense are important to understand. I don't think, it's not in quantitative medicine, it was in the Eat Real Food or Else I mentioned or talked about lectins. What's going on now is almost a fashion issue, but it's still not, it has value. Is what's called the plant paradox, the plant food paradox, which is largely addressing lectins and what's known as the leaky gut syndrome. And there is something to that. And there are almost no lectin-containing foods that I'm a fan of, but lectin certainly, it's worth paying attention to and minimizing some of the anti-nutrient lectins in your diet, and also the phytic or phytic acids, which are vegetable-based. Those also are anti-nutrients. So yeah, I think that's real stuff, if I could put it that way. It may be kind of oversold as the cure to every disease, but it's a real problem, and it has value to recognize the deleterious effects of lectins. Anything else? Any other questions there, guys?
Hey, Mike.
Yes, sir.
What is the knock on soy, and what is the thinking on eating every 3 hours?
Right. Well, the soy issue is, it's interesting. The deeply and ancient method of Chinese preparation of soy probably obviates a lot of what we in the modern world experience as bad side effects. And that's the phytoestrogenic effects. So the phytoestrogens in soy can be so substantial and absorbed in some people so completely that it completely imbalances their testosterone estrogen cycle. And they will, I have one patient, just a nice illustration. He was rebuilding an engine for his plane, and he was living on some kind of sports bar. And it turns out it was a soy protein bar. And I didn't know that at the time. He just came in for another blood set, and his estrogen had gone up 5-fold. I mean, it was like a woman's estrogen level. His testosterone was down. I said, "What happened here?" And we went through it, and he told me what he was eating. He showed me the label. He'd just been living on estrogen, basically, in point of fact, soy. And he hadn't got to, which has been reported about developing breasts and so on and so forth. But he clearly had virtually poisoned himself, unless he wanted to be a girl, with soy, just because of the amount of phytoestrogens he was absorbing by that method. So that's the primary knock on soy, is the phytoestrogenic effect in men. It's one of the reasons it was at one point, I think less now, recommended for women in their menopausal phase to help limit hot flashes. It wasn't some mysterious effect of soy. It was this, they were getting some estrogens to balance out their system. Does that answer your question? Oh, eating every 3 hours. Yeah. Eating every 3 hours. Well, the idea, but all right. So what we are, we're not grazers, and we're not like a cow. We don't graze. And grazers have to eat all the time because that takes that much energy, that much food for them to get adequate energy. What we know is our metabolism is built on highs and lows, sinusoidal variation of insulin and leptin and ghrelin. There's a whole array of these diet-sensitive, diet-related hormones in the gut and in the general system. And we don't want to flatten that curve. We want to continue to keep that supple diurnal, or not even diurnal, it's hour-to-hour variance in these hormones. And that's why we have these fasting cycles, to keep that going. And that's different than a 16-hour fast, but it is to stimulate, again, that the value of some variation in the body's demand for these balancing hormones. Is 3 hours magic? Yeah, it works out about right. And so that's where that comes from. What we know from other studies, pretty well done studies, again, CARE, is that people who graze tend to get fat, even if their total caloric intake is no higher than people that eat every 3 hours. So those are two arguments for that.
Got it.
Or what?
So Mike, is there a connection then with having our big meal at noon?
Well, the basic idea, again, is eat for what you're going to do instead of what you did. The morning is when your body's facing its biggest physiological challenge: breakfast big, lunch smaller, dinner small. That's just the distribution of needed energy throughout the days where that comes from. It's certainly dramatically better to eat your big meal at lunch rather than dinner. Again, if you eat late, you put your metabolism then into energy and muscle. So that's one of the reasons you want to do it earlier. Is that your question?
Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Anyone else?
So just,
Oh, got a question. Yeah, got a question on cleanses. Those are interesting. So the colon cleansing and entire intestinal cleansing, it's probably less any benefit. It's less to do with some, as it were, mechanical scrubbing of the gut, as the fact that you've had this dramatic change in the caloric and nutritional challenge that the gut is facing on a day-to-day basis. They all involve in some type of functional fasting, and that's probably healthy. So I certainly not recommending everybody start taking colonics and cleansing themselves out on a regular basis, but it is the case that some version of cleansing, in other words, that's basically eating differently for a couple of days or 3 or 4 days or even a week or two, is a helpful thing. The body needs that challenge. We don't want it to get flatlined. We like these dynamic variances in insulin, ghrelin, and leptin, and all those things, and that's why changing, and the question earlier about it being a vegetarian for a couple of days, those can be helpful. As long as you don't slip under this great cloud of, oh, I really should be a vegetarian. Don't do that, and then variability is a good thing. Okay, anyone else? I actually had this many people who don't have questions. Amazing. You guys can probably see the chat. There aren't that many chat.
Mike, can you hear?
Yeah, I can. Shoot.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was muted. You know, I recently read Undo It by Dean Ornish.
Yeah.
And the first chapter is all about, you know, his approach to diet, which is largely, you know, it seems like he's a fairly closeted vegan. But
Yeah, he is.
You know,
and he's pretty open about that.
He is. Okay. And is he just misinterpreting a lot of the data or just not reading as deeply? I mean, you know, he seems so authoritative, citing this and that study and the telomere length and this and that.
Yeah, now stop. Stop. Right there is where the whole thing goes off the rails. His primary big achievement, other than he cured prostate cancer, and that turned out those numbers weren't true. That was actual, I don't know if you'd call that criminal, but it was demonstrated that his prostate cancer study was flawed. He also had another study, this is a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, where he supposedly reversed coronary artery disease, and that was verified through intravascular ultrasound. Again, that was never verified outside of his own data. I've got some real questions about the integrity of his data. What I will say, though, is the telomere, that one's real. And he's been beating that one for a long time. The problem with that is it ignores the fact that if telomeres truly were the limit of our cell cycle, we'd all be dead by the time we're about 4 years old. Because they're that, I'm just sorry, let's do the numbers. How many telomeres are there on your gut lining? Not enough to last very long. And what's the point? The body renews telomeres on an ongoing basis if and when needed. So telomere length, what he did is he took people and basically arrested them. And that's, I don't know if you looked at that one study on telomeres. He basically arrested them and didn't feed them very much, and their telomeres got longer. I bet they did. And you pick them up and you put them to work and they get shorter because you burn out those cells. Telomere length is an inadequate and very misleading way to measure longevity effects of any diet. But if you sit down, don't move, kind of eat, your telomeres get longer. That's what he proved.
Got it. Hey, could you say more about his prostate cancer study then? What you were?
Well, unless he's updated that, the last I saw on the prostate study was, what is that, 20 years ago? It's been a long time. Does he have newer data on that? Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah, that just turned out not to be true. And it was actually looked at by external or outside scientific experts, and it didn't work. Didn't seem to be what they purported to be. And again, I am going to be careful. I'm in no position to charge him with any kind of fraud, but that was pretty surprising. The one that really was alarming to me was his coronary artery study. But Here's what I will tell you, and this is where all this is the area under the door where we all slip in. One of my old sayings is starvation cures disease, and it's true, except it's not a long-term solution. But mostly, if you saw did you see what he was feeding the prostate cohort? They were basically starving to death. And I think if you starved yourself to death, your prostate disease probably would slow down. But that's an old study, and that's been kicked around a lot. What Ornish has that I covet is ability to persuade and to raise money. He is trillionaire from generous people's help to support veganism. So he's a good marketer. Maybe I should take lessons. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I would love to see you counter his arguments more publicly for the benefit of everybody else, but I'm glad I'm hearing it today.
Yeah, again, I would just encourage you to simply sit down with our evolutionary history and see how you come up with anything other than we're omnivores. You can't. And the idea that we're going to think our way out of our evolutionary past and become some different evolutionary animal, it's just hubris in my mind. And that isn't to say there isn't an advantage to eating one way or another, or eating less of this or more of that. That you should do. But this notion that we really need to be vegans, and that's some sort of the arc of history bends towards veganism. It just seems silly. It's hubris at the most stark level. And his argument, or your argument, anyone's argument that we're not really omnivores, there's just no science to it. I've actually been in meetings with him, and just show you how far this goes. I'll drop this one. A woman in the audience stood up and said, my son, I don't even remember the numbers, it's been a long time, but my son is whatever he was, he's 6'5" and he weighs 200 pounds or something like that. And how can I keep him strong and healthy? He loves sports. The guy stood up and said, your son's too big already. I mean, that was her response. That was his response to that. And I think that's just kind of his response to that. Your biology's wrong, be something different. It's hubris. That's what I think insulted me about it.
Wow, I agree.
Your son's too big. Imagine somebody telling you that. Great.
Now you tell me.
Any other questions? Come on, you got any more vegans out there? Speak up. Have I got all the questions? All right. That's an hour. Oh, yeah, Phil's reminding me we should give you a little bit of a COVID update. Anybody wants that? Santa Clara County, hey, we're doing great. That's just the bottom line on it. We're doing great. It's just incredible. This is the Santa Clara County numbers. And, oh, I've got to do the, where is it? Yeah, sorry. No, where is it? Oh, the other one. I want to show you some, oh yeah, there it is. Where is share screen? It didn't come up. Is this in the way? Soon, in a minute, you'll be able to see the.
Dr. Mike, can I ask a quick question about COVID?
Sure. Where the heck is it?
Victor Davis Hanson on TV saying that the last couple of weeks there is no excess of mortality over what was predicted without virus. Is that true?
Well, okay. Well, excess mortality. Yeah, that's. Did I do it? You can see the screen now, right, guys? Well, what we know is that Italy, for example, had about 50% to 100%, there's some question about it, of excess mortality for that period of time. They just did. Britain
we're talking
has
about
had.
U.S.
Oh no,
No,
I'm going to get there. The Britain had excess mortality. There's no question about it. Now let me show you a way to think about those two cases. Now, for example, this is a dynamic number, so don't misread it, of deaths per 100,000. And here's the deaths per 100,000 of the US. It's 40, 4383. Of France is 46. Well, if you go up here a ways, pretty soon, I'm almost there, you'll see the UK is about 62, about 50% higher per 100,000 deaths. So those are places that actually did have deaths over, nationwide over baseline. Nationwide, as of now, we don't really have an excess deaths, but it's still so variable locally that you have to be careful how to interpret. That's why I'm kind of going rah for Santa Clara County. So the excess death issue is valid. Excess death has been higher in many places in the United States until fairly recently. Nationwide, it's not much above excess deaths at this point. I hope that answers your question.
But Mike, there's a huge variability around the country.
Oh, that's yeah. But I guess his point is, or the article he's referring to is if you smooth it across the United States, we're not much over excess death mortality. We've got these big numbers in New York and big numbers like that, and we're way over. They're way over. Their excess mortality is high, but it's smoothed out over the United States. It's not much above baseline excess mortality, but around here, this is hyperbole. Don't quote me. I'm being silly. It's almost like this has been a good thing. We're just not having much of a problem around here. This is Santa Clara County. There are 8,300 cases, 280 new. Total deaths through this whole thing is 180. Two of those, I think, are this last day or two. If you look at the hospital dashboard, which is an important one for me, or one I care about, you look at ICU beds. This blue is COVID positive. This is presumed, and even that number is flattened off. And if you look at non-ICU beds, again, the majority of those are pretty flat. If you look at all beds, where is it? I'm looking for, oh shoot, here it is, ventilators. If you look at the number of ventilators in our county, 700 or so, and the number that are used to COVID, it hasn't changed. It's been pretty flat. So we just don't have a problem here. That does not mean we should change our behavior much, but it does mean we should take a lot of the fear out of the story.
Dr. Mike, we live in Orange County, down just next.
I'm sorry. No, I'm playing.
I know. And we live next to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And things are not looking so great down.
No, they're not. That's correct.
You guys are very fortunate up there. You're more spread out. We're much more dense.
Yeah, that's all very true. That's what, and I think that's what his other point was earlier, that it's a lot of variability.
Yeah.
But if we keep the kind of trends that we have locally, I actually don't think there's going to be much in terms of herd immunity, but we have probably the best chance of anybody to sneak up there and not have a big bump in terms of ICU beds or ventilators or death or anything else. We kind of found that smooth path up the hill, but not there, not in Orange County. That's right.
Yes.
So Mike, here in Santa Clara, is the increase in cases just a result of a high level of testing that's being done?
Well, let me get to the testing.
And are you wearing lots of masks and doing the social distancing in Santa Clara or not?
My perception is most people are pretty good. Now, notice how kind of non-quantitative that is. What we almost are intrinsically socially distanced. That's just the nature of this area. Yeah. And I think that's the big variable, is we just aren't around people. And if we are around them, we wave at them across the street. And it's not that we wouldn't talk to them if they were in front of us. They're on the other side of the street. We just don't have a lot of social environments here. I mean, we have them. But if you take the big ones like sporting events and clubs out of the story, we don't have many. So that's one of the reasons we're so lucky that way. And it hasn't taken as much disruption in behavior as some other places where it's almost life and death. Well, okay, so yeah.
But Mike, if you pull up the chart on case counts.
Yeah, I'm looking at this cumulative tests in Santa Clara, 321,000, 9,000 positive, and positivity rates 4.2, 4.02, and that's been flat for probably a week. Okay, you see these blues are all the tests, and the oranges down here are the positives. And the positivity rate, a month or so ago, over a month ago, was 2.3. Now the positivity rate's flattening around 4. But again, if there are places in Florida where it's 40, there are places in New York where it's 30. So we're just way behind those numbers or way under those numbers. Is that the one you wanted, Bill?
No, I was looking for the one that shows the cumulative cases or cases by day, because that does show.
That's where I am. That's where I am. This is cumulative test, 321,446. Positive results, 9,227. Test positivity rate, 4.02%. This is that number. Are you looking at it?
No, I'm looking at there's a graph that shows the total case history.
For testing?
No, the number of cases by day.
You're talking about, well, okay. The way I have that, maybe we're talking about, well, I guess so. Is this the one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, and this is the same number, this 8,321 cases. Yeah.
That's over 6 months ago.
Yeah.
That's not right now.
No. What's the question, Bill? I'm sorry.
So the question is, there's a surge here in the last month, right? Granted,
well,
low positivity rate, and maybe it's a result of the high level of testing that's going on, and we're catching more people that weren't being caught before. But
notice this. So this is cases.
Yes.
This is deaths. And this is kind of the one that's interesting me. And as you can see, that's a cumulative number. But if you look at the number that are these new deaths, it's pretty flat.
Yes, agreed.
Okay. All right. I want to make sure.
So it's a much lower mortality rate than earlier in the beginning of the season.
Yes. Yeah. I think we talked about that last time about it seems to be weakening in some sense, right? Anyway. Well, yeah, that's, and by the way, the updates for therapies is not much. The remdesivir is still kind of, we don't even know when to use it. And the immune suppressants, we're getting better at using those, but we have to use them later in the disease. And then we've got some new immune stimulants, which we've been around forever, old beta interferon. And you use that. So we're getting a little more adept at manipulating the physiology over time. So we're actually doing a better job. But if you look at just even hospitalizations, not just deaths, which would be more a reflection of what's going on with treatment, but look at hospitalizations, that's also down. So we're just getting, it's less lethal, and that's fair, yes.
So Mike, if you're talking about how great Santa Clara is, that if education is done via county, do you think that will reflect on what our schools are going to be like in opening in August, end of August? And how do you feel about, schools and kids and COVID?
I think, well, unfortunately, it's become a kind of a political question. So I guess I'm going to get in trouble answering it. I think it's.
We won't quote you.
I think it's a shame if kids aren't in school and around each other. Their social life is so important. And it's just, I mean, I have some children in my practice, and they're having they're having nightmares. One guy is starting to have hallucinations of being violent. I mean, it is affecting them. These are kids. I mean, I don't have a high percentage of my practice as kids, but they usually have something else is why they're seeing me. But I'm seeing this in their emotional life, in the ones that I have in the practice, and I know it's happening. I mean, kids belong if not school, at least let them go play on the playground. They belong around each other. That's my position on that. Yeah. And am I worried about their exposure or getting the disease or coming up with lingering disease that's going to dog them into their 20s? No, not really. not at any meaningful statistical level.
So do you think a hybrid situation?
Sorry?
Do you think a hybrid situation, you know, as an educator, I'm very interested in seeing
Right.
what's optimal here.
Well, there's two elements to that. I just have before this meeting, I had a patient that I'm treating in, up in the Sierra foothills. He skis all the time, or not the foothills, but out there. And one of you guys, I see right there, know about that. In any event, we had a pretty good discussion on Zoom about some pretty deep emotional, spiritual, psychological issues that were showing up as a result of what he's going through here. And it was a really pretty good session. And I know the guy well enough. I know it might have been better if he'd been here, but I was very relieved or impressed how effective that mode of communication can be. So I think I'm hopeful that we're going to learn some variety of learning experiences that might include some things like remote learning and so on and so forth. But I'm worried about the social part as much as anything else for kids.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And Dr. Mike, on that subject, having two grandkids who look like they will not be too young, 12, 14, won't be going back to school regularly or even hybrid right now.
Yep.
It's LA County. And so 12, 14-year-olds need that socialization.
They sure do.
They can get it perhaps with friends in the neighborhood bubble or things like that, I hope, because I know it's a challenge.
Yep. I guess I'm dumbfounded at the terrible impact this is going to have on their developmental lives. I don't think they're all little snowflakes and they're all going to die. I don't want to sound too apocalyptic, but I do believe it's going to have a profound impact on their lifetime achievement and mental health. I really believe that. And I'm sorry to see that happen. So to that extent, I'm a fan of creating that bigger neighborhood bubble and more interactions with more people. I think that should happen for young people.
Yeah. I get it. That's good.
Anyway, I'll be glad to give you more numbers on COVID, but even places that were supposedly hotbeds like, oh, Japan is blowing up. No, it's not. And I've gone through, nation by nation. We've got a long way to go, but it ain't that bad, if I can put it that way. And I say that not to minimize it. Even if you look at this one, as you know, is the IHME is the kind of the standard of what people are using. And they're saying 219,000 by November 1st. And their numbers have been pretty good so far. And, you can see where that's going to go by, we're going to get that 300,000 mark that probably a lot of us thought we were going to get to.
Dr. Mike, do you have any thoughts, staying out of the political part of this, but the possible change from reporting to CDC to National Health, NHI, and whatever?
Well, the reason why I'll tell you why I'm laughing. It's a mess, and it ain't going to get any better. It's just, if you even look county to county, how variable they are about reporting and which ones they'll label COVID and which ones it's just, we're a big, woven tapestry of variability. That's just the nature of the human, well, at least the American conditions right now.
Okay. I didn't know if it would help or hinder or just have sort of, who knows?
I'm sorry, that's right. And again, I'm not laughing at you. I hope you know that. It's just,
I get
it's
that.
so crazy. It's just
crazy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, anyone else? Oh, I see Phil's on here with his mute. Yes, ma'am.
I typed this in the chat. I probably should have just said it, but like about an hour ago, I saw a news thing come across my phone, a quote from Bill Gates saying that no one of the potential vaccines right now would be sufficient or immunity, and I guess the implication was that people would have to take more than one vaccine. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, yeah, I'm going to toot my horn. I told you that months ago. And you can go back and see the very first one. That's correct.
Okay.
It's just that I mean, it's the same reason we've got to do the flu shots, and the flu shots are a guess, and there's 3 or 4 different flus in every flu shot, and some they get and some they don't get, and then we get a new one extra. That's the nature of this beast. It's not some unique, terrible trait of this organism. It's just what it's like with humans interacting with viruses, and this is a bad virus. And yes, I'm even wondering if there's going to be much effect at all of the immunizations currently on tap, but we'll see. The immune system can do amazing things, and maybe I'll be surprised, but I do not believe there's going to be a shot that's going to fix this for people or prevent them from getting it. I do not believe that.
Okay.
So, is this a line correct?
Sorry? I missed that. Anyway, trying to see if there's. I'm sorry we're going long. I want to answer your questions, but I was done in an hour. You got to let me. Give me credit for that.
If you have your podcast, please
Shall I cut it off? What do you think, guys? Phil's telling me, he's giving me these actions. I don't know if he's encouraging Harry Carey or telling me to shut up.
Thanks,
Okay,
Dr.
Phil.
Mike. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, you guys.
We'll
Bye.
talk again.
Much appreciated. Bye.
Bye.